Cecily and I met when we were 12 years old and immediately forged a bond that would last a lifetime. Over the course of decades, we managed to maintain our deep friendship. In October 2012, while doing Reiki on her, I found a dark spot over her left upper chest and told her to schedule a mammogram. I knew she had cancer. After many tests, the results came back. She had stage 1. It was aggressive and she would have to take action immediately, starting treatment, a double mastectomy, chemo, and radiation. She was open to this aggressive treatment, but knew that her husband John would not support her. He felt that cancer wasn't real, it was a moneymaker for Big Pharma. He had always been a conspiracy theorist, and this was just a big scam in his book. He was pressuring her to turn her back on modern medicine and to let him be her doctor. Cecily decided to trust him. I pleaded with her to reconsider. I could support her and take care of her while she had surgery and did chemo. She had an aggressive disease raging inside of her. There was no time for natural treatments. I felt helpless. 4 months after our visits with the cancer team at OHSU, Cecily called me and said she was ready for the surgery, but not the chemo. She was afraid the natural route wasn't working, and she knew that her time was short. When we met with the surgeon later that week, she told Cecily that she was now stage 4 with lymph node involvement. The cancer was spreading. There was no way to do surgery without first doing chemo for 12 weeks to shrink back the tumor. The surgeon said, "If I were to cut you open in this state, the cancer would spread like wildfire and you would be dead in a matter of weeks. I'm sorry, but chemo is the only choice at this point." Cecily flat out refused. I felt devastated. She went back home and continued to trust John's treatments, which included fresh juice 12 times a day with no other food, supplements, and a gram of marijuana oil. I had been meeting with her once a week to do Reiki and kept her motivated with life coaching. After a year of daily contact, she suddenly stopped responding to me. I was worried, but I figured if something was really wrong, John would call me. After 6 weeks of hearing nothing from her, I really began to be concerned, so I decided to drive over to their house. I was completely unprepared for what I was about to see. Cecily was naked. She had dropped 30 pounds. John was in the process of cleaning her wounds. I tried to hide my shock. The tumor and all of the surrounding lymph nodes had broken through the skin. Her breast was dark purple, and the skin was stretched so tight and thin that it looked like the whole thing would burst open. Her other breast, in sharp contrast, looked normal and was sagging against her stomach. I quickly retreated inside myself emotionally and quietly said a prayer. She told me this was just part of her healing process and that there was no need to be afraid. The tumor had to come out, and without surgery, this was the only way. She was convinced that she would have reconstructive surgery when it all healed. It was such an awful sight to see. It was hard to imagine that it could get any worse than this. I left her that day and did not see her again until my husband and I picked her up for a doctor's appointment a week later. She was already in much worse shape. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving 2013, and my older children were home with our family for the holidays. Cecily decided that she wanted to come back with us after the doctor's appointment, and she already had her bags packed. I was overwhelmed by the idea of caring for her, but my husband Nate assured me that we could do it together. Taking Cecily back to our home meant we would have to care for her. We would have to clean her wounds. She had to have fresh juice every 2 hours. She had to have multiple supplements and needed to be burped. She also needed help getting dressed, using the bathroom, and bathing. The cancer was in her brain by this time. I had found a tumor on her head a week earlier when I was holding her in my arms. Her oncologist said the cancer had likely spread through her entire body. She needed constant attention. At this stage, she should have been in hospice. She was dying. One of my closest friends joined us for the holiday. She and my daughter cleaned Cecily's wounds. I could not bear to do it. She smiled and thanked us while blood dripped down her body onto my bathroom floor like a leaking faucet. Neuropathy had taken over her body. The lymphedema was so bad that her left arm was twice the size of her right. Any movement hurt. She could no longer lay down because the tumor in her breast was crushing her lung. It was hard for her to breathe. That night, we danced with her, sang, and played music. We ate on the floor so we could all be near her. Her kidneys were shutting down, and the smell was awful. We had to keep all the windows open. It was a rough way to spend Thanksgiving, but we made the most of it. She stayed with us for 3 days, and I told her it was time to go home. She refused. I looked her square in the eye and said, "You and John chose this path. I'm not willing to walk you through the final stages of your life. It is not my calling, and I'm not going to have my family suffer through this kind of trauma." After a lot of resistance, she reluctantly got in the car with Nate, and he took her home. I knew when I touched her cheek and told her I loved her that I may never see her alive again. As they drove away, I sat down on my front porch and cried. I called John and expressed to him that she should be going straight to the hospital, not back home. I begged, "Please put her in hospice. Please don't let her die at home." He said in response, "Who the hell would do that? You know what? Don't worry about her. We've got this. I know how to take care of my wife." Who the hell would do that, I thought? Someone that would refuse any kind of Western treatment. I felt so angry. For so much of this journey with her through cancer, I felt so utterly helpless. Cecily had gone into hospice, but was only there for 3 days before John took her back home. The hospice nurses brought the hospital bed to her apartment and set up home care so that a nurse would come once a day. Her husband still refused to let her have any Western treatment, so no pain meds or sleep medication, nothing but vitamins, juice, and marijuana. A few days after she went home from hospice, I received a text message from John saying that he was grateful for all of our help, but that from now on only family would be welcome to visit or contact her. Even though his delivery method was poor and felt cruel at the time, the message that he gave me turned out to be a blessing. She lived for another month. It spared me seeing her and sharing her thoughts in her darkest hours, and for that I am grateful. Cecily's sister told me that in the end she could no longer walk. She was naked in the living room, barely covered with a sheet because she was burning up with fever and couldn't stand anything touching her. She had gone completely blind. Her left lung had collapsed and her liver shut down. When her lung collapsed and she could no longer breathe, John finally took her to the hospital. He brought all of their children to see her. When he took them back home that evening, Cecily finally had the space to let go. Her sister said she died shortly after he left. The few times I tried to reach out to John after she passed away, he found reasons to be angry with me. Maybe he was angry at me because I knew all of her secrets, or because she always said that I was her only true love. Maybe he loathes me because if she had followed my advice instead of his, she may not have died at all. Either way, she is dead, and I am angry with him too. John did not invite me to her funeral. In the end, she was able to let go. In witnessing that letting go, I let go as well. I had spent an entire year in grief knowing she would die. Once she had finally passed, I was so grateful that she was no longer suffering. It was a painful smile that spread across my lips, the same lips that had kissed her goodbye for the last time. Sleep sweetly, my dear friend. I will miss you.